Good afternoon from Austin, Texas, and welcome to another live stream from the Texas Public Policy Foundation. This week, we are bringing you a special book discussion focused on the homelessness epidemic that is unfortunately impacting cities throughout Texas and the nation. My name is Andrew Brown, and I have the pleasure of serving as a distinguished senior fellow of Child and Family Policy here with the Foundation. I'm honored to be hosting today's conversation with two inspiring women who are making a positive impact in the lives of our neighbors in need. The rise in homelessness in recent years has led communities and policymakers to wrestle with some particularly difficult questions concerning the root causes of homelessness and the best way to reduce the number of people who end up living on the streets. Often these conversations focus on the intricacies of public policy response, but overlook the people who are struggling. Rest assured, we will still be dealing with those public policy issues, but policy is ultimately about people. So today our goal is to put a human face on the homelessness crisis by sharing some stories of those who have struggled with and overcome homelessness, as well as those who have dedicated their lives to serving. I'm joined today by Michele Steeb, a friend and colleague at the Foundation. Michele recently joined TPPF as a senior fellow overseeing our work on addressing homelessness. Previously, she served for more than 13 years as the executive director of St. John's Program for Real Change, which serves women and children struggling with homelessness in Sacramento, California. During her tenure, she served on multiple boards tasked with addressing homelessness in California, including an appointment by then Governor Brown to the California Prison Industry Authority Board. She's authored a number of national editorials on the country's homelessness crisis, made several national television and radio appearances, and received numerous awards and honors for her work in helping people realize their full God-given potential. In addition to her already impressive resume, in October, Michele added published author to her list of credentials. Her book, Answers Behind the Red Door, is a powerful and sobering look at the growing epidemic of homelessness, and it will be the subject of our conversation today. I'm also joined by a new friend whose story I read in Answers Behind the Red Door just last week. Adriana is one of the millions of Americans who has experienced homelessness. But more importantly, she's someone who overcame homelessness and now dedicates her life to helping others do the same. She'll be sharing her full story later in the live stream, so I'll stop there so I don't give you all any spoilers. Michele, I want to start with you. Congratulations on the book. Having talked with you during the writing process, I know that it was a lot of hard work and a major labor of love on your part. After the many years that you spent working directly with those experiencing homelessness, why did you feel it was important to write this book at this time in our nation's history?
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much to TPPF for hosting this forum and Adriana for joining me, because it is so important that we hear directly from the people who've experienced homelessness to understand who we're dealing with and how to help them, how to best help them. I chose to write this book. I left California after serving at St. John's for 13 years. My husband took a job in Texas. I knew my work was not done, even though it might be done at St. John's, it was not done. And one of the things that I learned, one of the many things I learned at St. John's was what we needed to do based on the experience at the ground level to help policymakers understand what they needed to do to develop policy that really helps the homeless become all they can be. Right now, policy does not do that. Policy actually locks them in to the state at which they enter homelessness. And I felt like it was time for me to peel back that onion, not just for my own knowledge, but for the knowledge of the millions of Americans looking around, which I hear from every day, saying, why is homelessness increasing at such a rapid rate? Pre-COVID, we had a pretty fantastic economy by many measures, but homelessness was exploding even back then. And it's not just exploding in urban areas, it's exploding in suburban areas, it's exploding in rural areas across the country. And I felt like it was time for me to, again, answer this question for myself, but for many, many people across the country who were asking me why and what do we do to fix it.
And it's a fantastic book. And one thing that I really loved about it was how you put a human face on the problem. You did a fantastic job of just saying, this is the story of somebody who has struggled, who I knew, who I served. And these are the policy implications. This is what led them into their experience of homelessness. This is what kept them there because of the way that our government is responding to this crisis. And early in the book, you pose this question: why are they here and who are they? I'd like to start with the second part of that question. Who are the homeless in America today?
Well, there are estimates are varied. HUD says there's 568,000 people struggling with homeless in America on any given day, but actually the Department of Education and others who I think do a much better job of counting the homeless say there's somewhere between 2 and 3 million people every day struggling with homelessness in America. And it's likely much higher, as we experience the fallout from COVID. But let's take the 2 to 3 million number. They're men, they're women, they're children, they're emancipated foster youth, they're families. There's a wide variety of people. They are also and they've entered homelessness for a wide variety of reasons. If you look at the data, and it's very consistent with the data that we had at St. John's, somewhere over 75, 78% are struggling with mental illness. About 75% are struggling with addiction. In the case of St. John's, about 70% struggling with domestic violence, about 60% struggling with criminal histories, which makes it difficult for them to find places to rent and find employment. 50% don't have a high school diploma or GED. There's a myriad, and 30% have lost temporarily, hopefully, lost custody of their children. So there's a myriad of reasons that cause them to finally enter homelessness. And we need to recognize each person as an individual, what each person is struggling with in order to help them permanently exit homelessness.
The title of your book, Answers Behind the Red Door, refers to the homelessness ministry you ran in California's St. John's Program for Real Change. Tell us a little bit about the work of St. John's and the origin of that Red Door nickname.
So when I started at St. John's, we were a 30-day emergency shelter. And within a couple of weeks of my starting there, a woman named Katie and her daughter Tori came in. And a couple days later, a woman named Shelley and her 2 sons came in. I was shocked to learn that Katie and Shelley were sisters. But the bigger shock was to learn that 18 years earlier, Katie and Shelley lived at St. John's, a 30-day emergency shelter, with their mother. And it was right then that I knew we could no longer be a typical emergency shelter and think that work is important, but we were not helping people change the trajectory of their lives, clearly, right? Because Katie and Shelley were in our program after being in there with their mother. So we began building out what is now today an 18-month residential program. So women and children live with us at St. John's. We serve approximately 250 to 300 a day. But we have, where they live, all of the services they need to address the underlying issues they're facing and to begin to be able to develop the tools to manage those issues going forward. So at St. John's, we have employment training. We've developed 2 restaurants and a daycare program, all of which serve as hands-on employment training programs. We have mental health therapy. We have drug and alcohol counseling. We have budget and finance classes. We have transportation for the women and children to get to where they need to go. We have a childcare program that's fantastic. We have really under one, what I call programmatic roof, everything these families need to get healthy and for the moms to become the primary providers of their children over approximately an 18-month period.
Adriana, I'd like to bring you into the conversation now. You're someone whose life was forever changed behind that red door at St. John's. Tell us a little bit about your early life and what led to your experience of homelessness.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me. Michelle, what an honor to see you here today. I'd love to share that with you. So my name again, as you've introduced me, is Adriana, and I am a single mother of three beautiful children. And I know what you see before you today looks like this well put together individual, but prior to that, I had suffered a drug addiction of what ended up being 20 years. I was heavily addicted to methamphetamine from the time I was 14 years of age until I was about 35, 36 years of age. And what happened is that I grew up in a it's not that I had a very poor upbringing. I actually had a very good upbringing. I had great mom and dad. I grew up in a very well-to-do family, had a very affluential life. And so it wasn't one of those stories where I, suffered like so many of the children that you'll hear about in these stories of homelessness and things as such. But what I actually did was I felt like I never fit in. And so what I was really suffering from was mental health that went undiagnosed for years. And that feeling of not fitting in and not belonging. And so I found that I fit in and that I belonged when I used drugs in the area that I grew up in. And what happened was that I then entered a domestic violence relationship. It was heavy, filled with domestic violence. You had two very young teenagers who became parents at a very young age. We moved out, continued to use substances on a heavily daily basis, which then led to a very violent, dangerous domestic violence relationship. I ended up having two children with this individual and stayed in that relationship far too long. And so I just never saw a way out. Alcohol then came into the picture. And before you knew it, I was a dual addict. I had, methamphetamine on a daily basis and alcoholism. And all the while trying to power through and be a mom and be an employee, and it just fell apart.
And eventually, as part of your story, you did obtain permanent housing at one point through a program that the federal government has known as Housing First. How did that affect your life? Did that set things on the right course?
What an excellent question. The funny part is that when we hear about being the gifted housing, you automatically think, wow, you won the lottery. You're given free housing. When in actuality, for any person who's an addict or somebody who suffers with mental health, what really happened for me in that moment was you gave me a free place to use, right? And so my drug addiction ran rampant. I had no bills to pay because my housing, I was gifted Section 8 housing to get away from my domestic violence relationship. And all I did was escape deeper and further into my addiction. And I had this free space of not paying rent on a monthly basis in a beautiful space, mind you, where I could, send my kids off to their rooms or off to school and into the neighborhood to play, where I was free to use my drugs as heavily as I wanted to. So yeah, it wasn't something that, as much as you think it would have solved the issue, it actually made it worse.
Wow. So what was the breaking point? At what point did you decide enough was enough? What brought you to St. John's?
Oh, well, St. John's, I had been using so heavily and spiraling out of control. I had a nice house, right? I was gifted a nice home. I had two beautiful children at this point. I had a great job as a department head of a company. And I'll leave that company name out because they had no idea. But I was running things, and what I did was I ended up falling so deep into my addiction that I lost my home. I lost my car. I lost my kids. I ended up losing everything in what felt like a short period of time, but it had been my whole life leading up to that point, and spending years in free housing, spending every dime I got on drugs and alcohol. And so I finally, when I lost everything and I found myself just on the cusp of homelessness, like I had lost my home, I was I was going from house to house, friend to friend. I walked through my counselor's door at a wellness clinic, and she said, "Have you heard of St. John's?" And I was like, "What's that?" And she goes, it's a program, and it's for women and children. And I said, well, at this point, I'm willing to do anything. I'm willing to do anything it takes not to be homeless. So they signed me up for St. John's, and I found myself having to call every day. And really what that explained to me was, how much do you want this? How much do you want this roof over your head? Because unbeknownst to me, and I'm not thinking outside of myself as true drug addiction does, I wasn't thinking that other people were trying to get in just as much as I was. So to call every day, I was like, oh, this is so much work. But what I found is how badly did I want this? So I went in and entered into St. John's for the first time. And it was a 30-day program at that time, or actually it was an extended program at that time, but I only stayed for 30 days. I was trying to get into housing. And so what I did was I immediately grasped housing and relapsed again. Gifted housing, it's free. And I needed it just long enough to use again. And I did that simultaneously for a couple of years until that last time. And I came into St. John's because it felt like home to me. And I knew that this program, I saw what it had done for other women, and that if they worked this program, and actually, wasn't in it just for the quick fix as I was in the beginning, and they actually stayed with this program and sought the counseling and sought the mental health therapy and took the drug and alcohol counseling that was offered, and the classes and the daily routine that was offered in the life that I had not had a daily routine was such a gift. And to work that program and to allow it to work on the inside of you. And so I took that hand and I asked Michele, I said, Michele, give me one more chance to get this right. And I promise you, I won't let you down. This time there was something different in me and I really, really wanted it. And she said, come on back. And so I did. And I worked that program and everything that was offered to me. And here I sit before you today, clean and sober and very happy.
That's incredible. And congratulations on overcoming everything that you've overcome. And I've only read about the program or heard Michele describe it. And it does seem like it's a very demanding program. As someone who went through it, could you talk about how important it was for you to have very clear expectations that you were held accountable to?
That is a very, very true description of this program. It is in fact demanding, but that was something that I needed. For somebody who comes from being gifted housing and then all this no structure, I didn't have anybody telling me when to wake up. I was free to use all day long until I got into this program. And what this program gifted me was the daily routine of getting up every single day at a certain time, going to bed at a certain time, eating my meals 3 times a day with snacks in between as a healthy eater, right? Which I'd never had to do before, never really could afford to do before, let's be honest, right? It allowed me the benefit of daily showering and hygiene care. It allowed me also the structure and routine of taking care of my children on a daily basis and what that would mean, right? To make sure that they're fed and they're showered and bathed as well, right? And then off to school. So it allowed this, as much as demand as it was putting on me on a daily basis, which really held me accountable, it really restructured and retransformed my way of thinking. It is real change. That is what happened. That's what took place in me, was real change. The opportunity to change my daily life of routine of using drugs to a daily life of being a functioning member of society. And it allowed me to get up and go to work every day and realize and recognize that I had value, that my work ethic could be wonderful and sustainable, and that I was a good employee. All these years I spent thinking that I was just, I would just show up and people were lucky if I would show up. And really what that was selfish addiction. But what I realized was the structure and routine is what added value to my life. And I've been able, since leaving St. John's, to carry through that structure and routine on a daily basis, right? And here I sit before you, gainfully, fully employed, doing what I love, and that's helping others.
Well, let's talk about doing what you love. In a lot of ways, you're paying it forward by serving those who are struggling with some of the very problems that you've overcome. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do today and what it means to you?
I'm so glad you asked, Andrew. If you would have told me when I walked through the doors of St. John's that what you would see sitting before you here today is a drug and alcohol counselor, I wouldn't believe you. I wouldn't have believed you. But that's exactly what I get to do today. While I was working the program of St. John's, my drug and alcohol counselor actually said to me, just throwing out ideas of what I with my life, she threw out the idea of becoming a drug and alcohol counselor. And I thought, why would anybody want to listen to me? I've been a drug addict my whole life. And she said, that's exactly why you would make it a great counselor. And so today, after at the very end stages of my program at St. John's, I then took my counselor's advice and I enrolled in college courses to become a drug and alcohol counselor. I went through college courses. I signed up and was immediately offered a job and position at a residential treatment care facility, to which I worked that entirely. And I finished schooling. I finished my internship hours within a year, which normally takes about 5 years, give or take, but I did it in one. And I worked really hard to do it because of that work ethic that was implanted in me at St. John's, to get up every day and give it your very best. And so now I sit before you, a certified drug and alcohol counselor, who gets the opportunity to serve those very people, my people, those very same individuals in the community that struggle with addiction and homelessness on a daily basis. And I get to tell them exactly what I did and what worked for me, and that is possible for them to do it too.
You should be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished and the positive impact that you're making on the lives of others. For those in our audience who maybe pass by homeless camps on their commute every day, what is one thing that you want the audience to know about the people that they pass by on their way to work?
That is, sorry, that makes me a little emotional. I pass by that often. And often I find myself stopping to ask them, especially if I see a child, how I can help, if there's a food or a meal that can be offered. That rather than in that moment looking at that with disgust and disdain, as so often happens, right? But to know that those people didn't get there overnight, that happens to people just like me. It could happen to people just like you. It could be a single mom out there in that field, in that tent with her children, somebody who's heavily addicted to drugs, somebody who's possibly suffering with a mental health disorder that's been undiagnosed, somebody who suffered from a domestic violence relationship, who's fleeing and had no help and no family, nowhere to go. That is that person sitting in that field in a tent. That is that child out there. So please don't judge. Instead, always remember that could be anybody. It could be any one of us. It could have been me.
I think that's a great transition point to the policy part of our discussion, the why are they here part. Michele, you hit on the current state of homelessness earlier when you discussed the data and the numbers of how many folks in America are experiencing homelessness right now. And you, like many others, have transitioned from California to Texas. And as we've seen on the news, California has become infamous for the way that it struggles with homelessness and its response to the homelessness epidemic there. We're beginning to see many similar problems pop up right here in Texas, especially in Austin, where I am. How does the Texas experience and response compare to what you saw in California?
Well, there are so many parallels, and I would say, Mayor Adler, the mayor of Austin, is definitely following in Governor Newsom's footsteps. I guess the difference being that Mayor Adler chose to go to Mexico and Governor Newsom chose to go to French Laundry. But really, the parallels are so similar. First of all, they have enacted and are standing fully behind a policy, a one-size-fits-all policy. As we discussed earlier, the numbers of people struggling with homelessness are vast, and the reasons they enter into homelessness are vast. And we need to address each individual as an individual. There is no one-size-fits-all policy. Even if you believed it was housing first, in California, very similar to in Austin, there is not the housing stock available. So we're dead we're right out of the gate, we're dead. We don't have the housing stock available. But it's way deeper than that. It is really looking at each individual, helping them address their underlying issues, which neither Austin nor California recognize. And they continue to double down on this policy with millions and millions of dollars, and it's not working. The data is so clear, and they need to change. They need to look in the mirror, and they need to change their policies to address homelessness.
Let's talk about housing first, which you mentioned and which has come up in some of the responses to the questions. What is housing first, and how has it contributed to the current state of homelessness in America over the last decade?
Housing First was developed for a very small segment of the homeless population back in the middle part of the 2000s, developed, I believe, in New York City for the very severely mentally ill, chronically and addicted, chronically homeless population. And the idea was just, they cost the system so much, it's so dangerous for them to be on the streets. Let's just get them into a house, not require anything of them, because they have, in their mind, total freedom on the street. So we shouldn't require anything of them. We should just put them in the house. And maybe they will decide that they want help, and we can get them help if they decide. In 2011 to 2013, under the last administration, that policy was rolled out despite any data that would show that it would work for everyone. It was rolled out as a one-size-fits-all policy. So now our nation's policy in California, policy in Austin, is that we take everyone who struggles with homeless and we give them a house for life. We don't require anything of them, no requirement to address their mental illness, no requirement to address their addiction. They can continue to use in that house. They never need to work. It is lifelong housing. And as Adriana put it so well, I can't say it nearly as good as she did, that gift is really not a gift. It is actually a curse. It is a straitjacket to keep people in, to lock people into the state at which they entered homelessness. And it is so clearly failing America. It's failing Texas. It's failing California. The data is very clear now.
Adriana, you alluded to that earlier. You said the house that they gifted you was a free place to use. I want to talk from your experience as a counselor. What are some of the advantages of, let's call it, a more holistic response to homelessness that addresses the whole person, as opposed to something like Housing First, which is targeted just at putting the roof over someone's head?
What a great topic to hit on. When I am counseling my clients, there is not one client that I would sit here and give a one-size-fits-all session to, because it wouldn't work, right? I have to deal with the individual that comes through this door, and I have to address their needs, right? And so what I find is that when this whole holistic approach where you're tapping into the individual, because not everybody has their high school diploma. Not everybody knows how to read or write. Some people are coming in dealing with drug addiction. Some people, it's domestic violence or low self-worth. Some people are dealing with childhood trauma, right? That has left them feeling hopeless and alone. There's so many different entities that make up why people become homeless. So it makes no sense to just put a one-size-fits-all umbrella to block this rain. There's lots of different storms that come in people's lives, right? And I want to make sure I'm dealing with the individual and I'm meeting their needs, right? And so for me and my family, it was domestic violence. It's drugs and alcohol. It was, housing. That was the end piece. But I couldn't sustain a job, right? I couldn't sustain and keep a job for long periods of time because my drug addiction would reinfest itself. And I couldn't keep my children. I couldn't be a mother to my children. How is giving a person like me, a mother like me at that point in my life, a house going to do me any good? It just isn't. It's going to allow me to use as often as I wanted to, and it did, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my friends along too who are homeless, and because misery loves company. And what you have are these drug-infested houses and spaces. So every day when I'm counseling my clients who are struggling with homelessness, I gear them towards programs that are going to benefit and tailor to their needs, right? I want to make sure that we get to the root of the problem. Why are you using? Why do you continue to stay homeless? What is going on? If it's domestic violence, then we're going to get you help and treatment that's geared towards domestic violence. If drugs and alcohol is your root, then let's touch the root of the problem instead of just trying to throw a jacket on it, like Michele said.
All of these root causes that we've been talking about, there was one that really jumped out to me that you mentioned. You said childhood trauma. And at the foundation, I have the privilege of working on child and family issues, which touches a lot on foster care. And we know from the data that a significant percentage of people that are struggling with homelessness had contact with foster care or the child welfare system at some point in their childhoods. Michele, I think you used the term in the book, adverse childhood experiences, as a major root cause for homelessness. Could you unpack this term a little bit for us and talk about how it plays a role in contributing to homelessness?
Sure. So the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale, ACEs is what it's called, and there's a lot of data out there that you can Google for more information. But it's basically a scale that that measures the amount of trauma that children and adults have faced. At St. John's, we began using ACEs back in 2017. And our typical client had an ACEs score of anywhere between 4 and 9. What the data shows, and again, it's all available online, what the data shows is that anyone that has an ACEs score above 3, where that trauma, and the trauma could be domestic violence, it could be homelessness, it could be a parent who was an addict. There's a myriad of traumas that that factor in here. But anyone with a score of over 3 was at high risk of obesity, suicide, addiction, homelessness, a myriad of issues. And the ACEs data is so, and this is one of the arguments we use to addressing family homelessness. Right now, HUD at the national level has been very focused on individual homelessness, and they really in so many ways have ignored families. And not only do we believe that's horrible on its surface, that women and children are the most vulnerable, one of the most vulnerable segments of the homeless population, but in order to turn off the spigot, in order to ensure that the children of today who are experiencing homelessness don't become the street homeless adults tomorrow, we have to address their childhood trauma, which is why at St. John's we brought in a complete mental health department. We didn't get one dime of government funding for that department for those services. We underwrote it all out of our general fund, our operating budget that we raised from the community, because we so believe that it was key to the healing necessary to help these families become productive and never enter homelessness again.
And since you joined TPPF, we've been working to influence the federal government's policies on homelessness and change some of these unintended consequences of a short-sighted policy. And just last month, the foundation had the privilege of participating in an event with Secretary Ben Carson of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, where he announced that HUD was working to develop the more holistic approach that we've been talking about here today, that relinks housing with services and expectations and accountability. Tell us a little bit more, Michele, about this important change in direction.
Yeah, so I do want to stress housing is an important part of the equation, but as Dr. Marbut, who heads up usage, often says, it's housing fourth. I don't know if it's housing first. There is no one size fits all, right? But it's housing is a part of the equation. But as Andrew, you pointed out, under the housing first policy, where we've completely divorced housing from the services, the healing services, addiction, mental illness, employment training, getting your high school diploma. As you marry those two together, that is what we need to do to help people escape homelessness permanently. But today that is, and so let me say that after many years in office, and Dr. Marboot's been there for about a year, but Secretary Carson for about 3 years, they finally called for data. They said, let's get the data. We've had housing first in place since 2011 to 2013. Let's pull together the data and see that whether it works. A lot of the advocates in homelessness have told us it works, but a lot of people like Michele, because I was back there a lot, say it doesn't work. So let's pull together the data. Well, the data clearly shows homelessness has exploded under Housing First by over 16%. And that is the most conservative number. That's using HUD's numbers. If we were to use Department of Education's numbers, it would be upwards of over 60%. Homelessness under this policy has exploded despite the promise that Housing First would end homelessness in a decade, and despite the fact that they've increased spending over this same period by 200%. That's the United States. In California, we've got a very similar situation, 16% increase statewide since they instituted Housing First in 2016. In many cities and counties throughout California, it's even worse. In San Francisco, it's 18%. In Sacramento, it's 19%. The data is and it's clear in Austin. Austin, I think unsheltered population, Andrew, has gone up by 23% in the last couple years. And there's been a much greater increase in overall homelessness. So it has not worked anywhere. And it is not a affordable housing issue. That plays a role in some of these communities. But when you are also seeing the type of explosion in rural America that you are in urban America, you can't blame it on affordable housing. It is a deeply rooted individual issue that needs to be addressed at the individual level.
I'm going to ask both of y'all to look into your crystal ball. As of right now, it seems like we will have divided government on January 20th with a Biden administration and a Republican-controlled Senate. Now, assuming that this trend holds with the special election coming up in Georgia, what would you expect to see over the next 4 years in terms of the federal response to homelessness?
Well, so as I'm watching what everyone else is watching, it looks like President-elect Biden is bringing back a lot of people that served in the Obama administration. And I would expect that trend to continue as it relates to HUD. Given that this one-size-fits-all policy was rolled out under the Obama-Biden administration, I'm expecting they're going to continue to go all in on this policy, that there aren't going to be any changes. But what I will say, or not willingly any changes, but what I will say that we finally have, thank you to USICH and HUD and this new expanding the toolbox report that they unveiled in Austin last month, what we now have is data. And that data is unequivocally showing that Housing First, under Housing First, as a one-size-fits-all solution, it has failed. The country is suffering, individuals are suffering, and we really need the people to start to demand from their elected leaders change in policy that addresses individuals' reasons for entering into homelessness and helps them heal and helps them grow and move on from there.
I would have to say that we learn by looking at the past and not by living there, but we can always learn from it. And so if I was to look into the future, I would say I hope that we do look to the past to learn what not to do, and what didn't work, and how to make those changes in the future. If we want to see a better future, if we want to see individuals get the help that they so desperately need, then we need to deal with the core issues at hand. And that's where the changes need to be implemented. And that's where it needs to happen. It needs to happen with the individual and not just this umbrella of a one size fits all. It just doesn't work.
So for those who are tuning in today who may not be policymakers, but want to get involved, want to do something about the problem, want to contribute to their community, what can they do to influence change, whether it's in their neighborhood, in their community, or at their state level?
Well, I would say go online and Google this Expanding the Toolbox report and make sure that your elected officials have this data. This data is very clear and it is very, very newly pulled together data. Make sure they have it. We can't assume that all of them have it. It's been a busy last couple of months for everyone, including our elected officials, and we need to make sure that they're armed with this new data that shows that housing first as a one-size-fits-all policy doesn't work. That's number one, is to make sure that they're armed with the data. Number two, they need to make sure that they demand change from these same elected leaders. If, in fact, you live in a community where housing first is the one-size-fits-all solution, as it is in Austin, as it is in California, as it is federally, then you need to demand change. You need to say, we need a policy that is not one size fits all, that helps people address their underlying issues and that funds the addressing of their underlying issues, which right now, if you're under housing first, there's no funding for the services that are required, that are needed to address these issues. And they need to demand that they have quarterly report backs on, once they change policy, how is it working? How many people have they served? And how much is it costing per person that they serve? That is sorely lacking in any sort of reporting right now that is being done, if any. They don't include the cost per person. In California right now, they just invested $800 million in Project Room Key, which they're now calling Project Home Key, and $800 million to buy 6,000 hotel units. Well, that's good, but when you're looking at spending, I think it's about $230,000 per unit, that's just the capital acquisition costs. That does not include the renovation costs to get these units up to code. It doesn't include the fact that there's no operating subsidy from the individual. So, you're looking at probably about $100,000 a year per room, rather $10,000 a year per room to operate these hotels. So where is that money going to come from? We need, as voters, as citizens of this country and citizens of whatever community we're in, to not only demand accountability, but to demand the costs and to be able to look at those over time and be at the table when we're evaluating whether or not those are worthwhile investments, whether or not we've done well with our investments.
Adriana, any advice for the folks who are watching who might want to get involved with with helping to solve the homelessness crisis?
I love that. I know so many people want to help and they want to get involved, and you can. Your voice should be heard. And what you can do is start right where you're at. Start behind your computer, like Michele said, and stay informed. Get girded with information, because that is the most powerful thing that you can do. And that's number one. Number two, do hold your elected officials accountable. That money has got to go somewhere, and shouldn't it go to helping the people that when you drive down that street in that neighborhood and you see them in that tent, shouldn't it go to helping them make real lasting change? And how can that happen? Ask questions. When you go and as so many people like to help and to serve, especially around the holidays, I find Go into those programs, into those residential treatment centers, into shelters. Ask when you're serving, what kind of programs do they offer to help long sustainable change? Are they offering, GED programs? Are they offering counseling? Ask those kinds of questions. And if they're not, take it to your a local elected official and ask why not. So you can be the change that you want to see in the world. And if you want to help people, remember, look at me sitting before you today, because a woman like this believed that change could happen. And it is. And I am that change. And I continue to be that in the world every single day.
Well, thank you for that. I think there's no more powerful way that we could wrap up our discussion. We've had a few questions come in from the audience that I'd want to pose real quick before we conclude today. One of the questions is about the Austin camping ordinances. So for those who may not be familiar, over the last year, the city of Austin has had an ongoing battle over a decision by the city council that legalized public camping. And shortly after that decision, we saw tent cities popping up all over the city, near sidewalks, under overpasses. And there were some concerns about the public health crisis that was creating, and really concerns about the conditions that our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness were being forced to live in. Do these camping ordinances that allow people experiencing homelessness to pitch a tent on the side of the road, do they really help, or are they doing more harm than good?
Well, I talk a lot about this in the book, and you brought up the public health implications, Andrew. In 2016, there was a major hepatitis A outbreak in San Diego, and then subsequent to San Diego, a similar outbreak in about, I think, 20 other communities across the country, and it's very contagious and deadly. And it was spreading like wildfire in the homeless communities, in particular in non-sanctioned encampments. And after they got their arms around the problem, they stopped the spread, thankfully. Public health officials across the country said, we need to discuss this whole encampment issue as it relates to public health and the potential spread of communicable diseases. There was calls across the country for discussions to be had by elected officials, by public health officials, and those calls went ignored. So when we were faced, unfortunately, with COVID-19 epidemic, there had been no discussion, virtually no discussion about what to do as it related to, the homeless and how to keep from a major spread within the community. And so we reacted very quickly. We can't go back, we can only go forward. But I lay this out in the book in great detail. One of the things we need to do when we finally start to emerge from COVID is we cannot make these same mistakes another time. We need to have these very hard discussions. I, for one, believe that sanctioned encampments are necessary for certain people, for people who have been on the streets for a good period of time. In our case, in Sacramento, it was on the river. They would very likely not be able to survive in a program like St. John's right off the streets. We have had some people do it, but it is very, very rigorous, as we discussed earlier. We need to meet people where they are. A sanctioned encampment, however, is very different from an unsanctioned encampment where there's no rules and there's no ability to control behavior and to ensure that the neighbors are not being harmed, nor the people living in the encampment. They're very different things. And I point out a sanctioned encampment that I think is a great model in the book, one that we should look to. But no, I do not believe we should be allowing unsanctioned whether it be single tents or encampments, they should not be allowed. And we need to start making very tough decisions for the sake of not only the homeless, but the communities surrounding them.
You mentioned sanctioned encampments, which segues really nicely into another audience question that we received. Recently, Governor Greg Abbott here in Texas set up a sanctioned encampment just outside of downtown area of Austin. What else should Governor Abbott do? And I'll broaden that question a little bit for our national audience. What should governors do to respond to the homelessness crisis that their states may be struggling with?
Well, if they adopted housing first as their one-size-fits-all statewide policy, they should change that. And thankfully, in the case of Texas, Governor Abbott has not done that. The Texas state legislature has not done that. And so they have a better base from which to start here. The first thing I would do is say that, and Adriana pointed this out earlier, and I was glad she did, we need to invest in programs that help the homeless to grow. Not everyone is going to be able to become a drug and alcohol counselor and a single parent of 3 children as successfully as Adriana has done, but everyone can grow. Indeed, that's how life works. You need to, grow from first grade to second grade to third grade and hit benchmarks. And once you get out of high school, you need to grow into a job, or you grow into college. And once you get out of there, you continue to grow in your job, and you grow as a hopefully into a parent who meets benchmarks. I mean, that's how life works. And for whatever reason in homelessness, we're saying the homeless, they're not like us. They don't get to grow. I mean, I think about this as it relates to some of these policies that I've seen in California. Governor Newsom said in his latest curfew that the homeless were excluded. And I said, why would we exclude the homeless from this curfew? Give them a chance to help keep themselves safe, to help keep their neighbors safe. Give them a chance. Maybe you aren't enforcing to the degree you might in another area of your community, but give them a chance. Don't make them feel like they're second-class citizens. That's exactly what we do. When we expect nothing, we make them feel like second-class, third-class, fourth-class citizens, and that is wrong. What makes me so sad about policy today is how many people we have straitjacketed into existence without giving them the opportunity to grow and flourish and become all that they were meant to be. It makes me so sad when I think about this every day.
Well, as we wrap up, Adriana, I want to give you the final thought. Since your story is featured very prominently in Answers Behind the Red Door, what is the one thing that you would want people to come away with after they've finished reading Answers Behind the Red Door?
I would really want people to know that homelessness knows no boundary. It has a face, it has a name, and it can happen to anyone. And that to remember that when you're looking at a person, you're looking at the individual. When you're looking at somebody that you deem a drug addict, that person is a person dealing with addiction. When you're looking at a person who's suffering mental health, you're looking at a person suffering with a mental health disorder. When you're looking at a person, or you see them in a tent, or a child whose clothing may not be up to par, with a single mom, remember that you are watching a person struggle in life. And to remember that we as a people have a voice, we have a vote, we have a say. And to remember that we can't always band-aid everything. That's just not the way it works. And if you want to make a change in life, and you want to make a change in your community, it starts with you.
Well said. Michele, Adriana, thank you so much for joining us today. For our audience, we hope that you enjoyed this live stream. Please check out Answers Behind the Red Door, which is available on Amazon. And as always, please go to texaspolicy.com for our latest work and to learn more about how you can be part of keeping Texas and America the best place to call home. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Andrew.